January 10th, 2023. A man lies strapped to a gurney in Huntsville, Texas. He's about to die. Not because he pulled the trigger, but because he paid someone else to do it. The victim, his own wife. The mother of his 3 children. And here's the part that'll make your stomach turn. Those same children, now adults, are standing behind the glass, watching him die. They're not crying. They're not begging for mercy. They want this. His name is Robert Allen Fratta, former cop, father, and convicted murderer. Before you judge him, before you decide if this is right or wrong, you need to hear what he did, what he asked his wife to do in bed, what he whispered to strangers at a gym, how much he paid for her life. $3,000 and a Jeep. That's what a mother of 3 was worth to him. When they asked if he had any last words, any apology, any regret, he said nothing. Complete silence. Just like the night his wife was gunned down in her own garage while he sat in church with their kids, building his alibi. So here's the question you're going to wrestle with for the next 20 minutes. Is this justice, a cold-blooded killer finally getting what he deserves? Or is this just the state of Texas doing exactly what Robert did, deciding who lives and who dies? Because by the end of this story, you're going to have to pick a side. And trust me, there's no easy answer. Let's go back to when this all started. Before the murder, before the hitman. Back when Robert and Farrah Fratta were just 2 people trying to make a marriage work and failing miserably. Farrah was 33 years old, a mother of 3 young children who depended on her for everything. Friends described her as warm, caring, the kind of woman who put her kids first no matter what. But behind closed doors, her marriage was rotting. Robert had demands, twisted sexual fantasies that made her uncomfortable. He wanted her to defecate in his mouth so he could eat it. He wanted her to urinate on him. This isn't speculation. This came out in court testimony from her own attorneys. Farrah told them she couldn't do it anymore. She wasn't comfortable. She wanted out. So she filed for divorce. And that's when everything changed. Robert Allen Fratta wasn't just any husband. He was a cop, a former public safety officer, a man who swore an oath to protect people. On paper, he was the good guy, the kind of father who should have been coaching Little League and helping with homework. But when Farrah asked for a divorce, when she dared to walk away, something inside him snapped. He didn't try counseling. He didn't try to fix things. He told his co-workers multiple times, "I'm going to kill her." Some laughed it off. They thought it was dark humor, just a bitter ex-husband venting. But Farrah didn't laugh. She knew better. Months before her murder, someone broke into her home in the middle of the night. She screamed. The intruder ran. Police were called, but nothing came of it. Farrah told friends and her lawyer she was terrified. She believed Robert was going to kill her. She said it out loud. She filed complaints. She begged people to take her seriously. And then, on November 9th, 1994, she went to a hair salon and cut her shoulder-length hair short. Friends said it was symbolic. She was moving on, letting go of the past, starting fresh. That same evening, she pulled into her garage in her red Mustang convertible. She stepped out of the car, and 2 bullets ended her life. 1 to the head, 1 to the neck. She collapsed in a pool of blood, while her ex-husband sat in a church pew with their 3 children, pretending to pray. Here's what messes with your head. Robert wasn't a monster from birth. He was a father. He tucked those kids into bed. He drove them to school. But somewhere along the way, his bitterness, his need for control, his rage at being rejected, it turned him into something else. Something that could look a stranger in the eye at a gym and ask, "Do you know anyone who can kill my wife?" Not once, not twice, 7 times. 7 different people heard him say it, and most of them thought he was joking. So now you have to ask yourself, was this a man who loved his family and lost his mind? Or was this a cold, calculated predator who wore a badge and fooled everyone? Because the truth is, it's probably both. And that's what makes this so hard to swallow. Farah feared the man she once loved, and her children lost both parents the night she died. One to a bullet, the other to a prison cell, and eventually a lethal injection table. This isn't a story about a hero and a villain. It's a story about a family that was destroyed from the inside out. And the question you have to answer is, when Robert finally paid the price, did that make anything better? Or did it just add one more body to the pile? November 9th, 1994. Atascocita, Texas, 6:45 p.m. Farah Fratta walked out of a local hair salon with a new look. Her shoulder-length hair was gone, cut short and fresh. To her friends, it was more than just a haircut. It was a statement. She was moving on, leaving the ugliness of her divorce behind, starting a new chapter. She had no idea she had less than an hour to live. She drove home in her red Mustang convertible, the kind of car that screamed freedom. She pulled into the garage at 13718 Napier Lane. The door closed behind her. She stepped out of the car, and that's when he appeared. A man in black, masked, waiting in the shadows. He didn't say a word. He raised a revolver. 2 shots, bang, bang, 1 bullet to the head, 1 to the neck. Farah collapsed instantly, face down in a pool of her own blood. She never had a chance to scream, never had a chance to run. It was over in seconds. A neighbor heard the shots. She looked outside and saw the masked man in black hiding near Farah's home. She grabbed the phone and dialed 911. While she was still on the line, she watched him flee. Another car pulled up, he jumped in, and they vanished into the night. By the time EMS arrived, Farah was gone. She was airlifted to a nearby hospital, but it was too late. She was only 33 years old. Meanwhile, Robert Fratta was sitting in a church pew with their 3 children. Something he never did. Friends said he never took the kids to church. But that night, of all nights, he played the devoted father, the perfect alibi. When he came home and found out his ex-wife was dead, witnesses said he didn't cry. He didn't break down. He seemed detached, calm, almost rehearsed. And that's when police started asking questions. But here's the thing. This murder didn't start that night. It started months earlier, at a gym. Robert Fratta was a regular at a local fitness center in Humble, Texas. He lifted weights, he made small talk, and he quietly shopped for a killer. He didn't hide it. He asked at least 7 people over several months the same question. Do you know someone who can kill my wife? Some laughed it off. Some thought he was venting. But one man didn't laugh. His name was Joseph Price Dash, a 39-year-old with a criminal record and access to people who didn't ask questions. Price Dash listened, and he knew just the guy, Howard Guidry, a desperate 17-year-old kid who needed money. The deal was simple, $3,000 and a Jeep. That's what Farah's life was worth. Not love, not rage, just a transaction. Cold, calculated, business. Price Dash handed Guidry a revolver. He drove him to Farah's neighborhood. They waited. And when she pulled into that garage, Guidry did exactly what he was paid to do. 2 shots, clean, quick. Then Price Dash picked him up, and they drove off. Guidry later confessed he called from a payphone right after the murder. Phone records confirmed it. The same payphone outside a convenience store, the same time Farah died. For 5 months, The case went cold. No gun, no witnesses, no proof. But then, in March 1995, Howard Guidry was arrested for an unrelated bank robbery. Police recovered cash, guns, and ballistics. One of those guns was tested, and it matched the same revolver used to kill Fratta. The purchase led straight back to Robert. Guidry cracked under pressure. He confessed. He named Joseph Price Dash as the driver, and he named Robert Fratta as the man who paid for it all. But prosecutors needed more than a confession. They needed evidence. That's when Mary Jipp stepped forward. She was Joseph Price Dash's girlfriend, and she had been in the room, not during the murder, but close enough to see the aftermath. She told the jury that weeks before Farah's death, she overheard Robert and Price Dash whispering in the gym locker room. The plan was already in motion. The night of the murder, she came home to find Howard Guidry sitting outside in all black. Minutes later, Price Dash walked in, tossed a revolver into her bedroom, and calmly emptied the shells into her kitchen trash. Then he looked at her and said, "Yes, she's dead." Mary didn't go to the police that night. But when detectives confronted her, warning that she could be charged for withholding evidence, she told them everything. The meetings, the payphones, the loaded gun, the casings tossed in her trash. She even wrote down the gun's serial number out of instinct. That serial number matched the murder weapon. Phone records showed calls between Robert Fratta and Joseph Price Dash in the days leading up to the murder. Surveillance logs placed Price Dash's vehicle near Farah's neighborhood that night. Witnesses remembered seeing a suspicious car parked not far from the Fratta residence around the time of the shooting. Every piece fit. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a man who lost control in a moment of rage. This was a man who asked 7 people if they knew a hitman, who negotiated a price, who handed over $3,000 and a Jeep, who sat in church with his kids while a teenager he paid pulled the trigger on their mother. And when detectives brought Robert in for questioning, they asked him a simple question: what should happen to someone who kills another person? Robert replied coldly, they should rot in prison forever. Then they asked, what about a husband who kills his wife? Robert paused, smirked, and said, that depends. He didn't hide his hatred. He didn't fake grief. The day after his wife's murder, investigators recorded him on camera. He was smiling. So here's the question that's going to eat at you. How does a father, a cop, a man sworn to protect, turn into someone who casually orders a hit like he's buying a used car? And when the state finally caught him, when they strapped him to that gurney years later, was that justice? Or was it just revenge dressed up in legal paperwork? April 1996. Robert Allen Fratta sat in a Harris County courtroom as the jury read the verdict. Guilty of capital murder. April 24, 1996, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. The prosecution had built an airtight case. Phone records, ballistics, Mary Jipp's testimony, Howard Guidry's confession, co-workers who heard him say he'd kill her. Every piece of evidence pointed to one cold, undeniable truth. Robert Fratta paid to have his wife murdered. And now, the state of Texas was going to make him pay. But he wasn't the only one. Joseph Price Dash, the middleman who drove the triggerman to the crime scene and supplied the murder weapon, was tried separately in July 1996. His trial lasted just over a week. The evidence was overwhelming. Phone logs, Guidry's testimony, his own criminal record. July 8, 1996, he was found guilty. July 11, 1996, sentenced to death. Then came Howard Guidry, the 17-year-old who pulled the trigger. He sat quietly in court as his own confession played aloud. The jury didn't see a scared kid. They saw a willing killer. March 27, 1997, Guidry was convicted of capital murder. April 16, 1997, sentenced to death. 3 men. 3 death sentences. Justice served, right? Case closed? Not even close. Years later, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals dropped a bombshell. All 3 convictions were overturned. The reason? Issues around co-conspirator confessions being introduced improperly during trial. Legal experts argued that using one defendant's confession against another without proper safeguards violated their constitutional rights. To some, this was the system working exactly as it should, protecting the accused, making sure no one is executed on shaky legal ground. To others, it was a technicality, a loophole, a way for killers to buy more time while Farah's family waited for closure. So they went back to trial. All 3 of them. New juries, new defense strategies, new arguments, but the same evidence, the same phone records, the same ballistics, the same testimony from Mary Jipp, who broke down on the stand describing the night Joseph Price Dash tossed a murder weapon into her bedroom and said, yes, she's dead. And once again, all 3 men were convicted. Again. In 2009, Robert Fratta was sentenced to death for the 2nd time. But here's where it gets messy, where the debate starts, where people pick sides and go to war in the comments. Because this wasn't a quick process. This was decades, decades of appeals, decades of legal battles, decades of Farah's family watching these men live while their mother, their sister, their daughter stayed buried. Some people see that and think, good, the system was careful. It double-checked. It made sure they got it right before taking a life. Others see it and think, this is torture. Dragging out justice until it doesn't even feel like justice anymore, just cruelty wrapped in bureaucracy. And then there's the bigger question, the one that's going to divide you. If the system can overturn convictions, if it can admit mistakes were made, if it can say we got the process wrong the first time, how can we then trust it to kill someone the 2nd time? Is that relentless pursuit of justice? Or is that a flawed system refusing to admit it shouldn't have the power to execute anyone at all? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The same courts that sentenced Robert Fratta to death also threw out his conviction. The same system that called the evidence airtight also said it was presented improperly. So which version do you trust? The one that said he deserves to die? Or the one that said, wait, we made a mistake? Robert Fratta never showed remorse. Not in 1996, not in 2009, not even on the day of his execution. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't cry. And maybe that's why so many people felt no sympathy when his time finally came. But does a man's lack of remorse justify the state's decision to kill him? Or does it just make it easier for us to watch? Some of you are going to say he got exactly what he deserved. He paid for murder. The state paid him back. Eye for an eye. Justice. Others are going to say the system that convicted him, overturned him, convicted him again, and then killed him anyway is just as broken as the man it executed. That we can't trust a process that admits its own mistakes and then kills people anyway. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. Was this careful justice? A system that took its time, double-checked the evidence, gave him every possible appeal, and still came to the same conclusion? Or was this cruel justice? A system that drags families through decades of pain, admits it made errors, and then kills a man anyway because it's too proud to stop? You're going to have to decide, because the next part of this story is where it ends, and there's no going back. January 9th, 2023. Inside the Polunsky unit in Livingston, Texas, the clock was ticking. For Robert Allen Fratta, this was the last full day of his life. Nearly 3 decades earlier, he had orchestrated the cold-blooded murder of his ex-wife, Farah, shot in her garage while he took their 3 young children to church to create a perfect alibi. Now, justice had come full circle. Fratta spent the day like any other condemned man in Texas, alone in his cell, watched, waiting. He ate the standard prison meal, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, scrambled eggs, cereal, a cup of milk. Nothing special, no last meal request. Because Texas outlawed that tradition years ago after a death row inmate abused it by ordering a feast he never touched. But Fratta's silence was more disturbing. He had never shown remorse. Not when he was convicted in 1996, not during his retrial in 2009, and not now. As the state prepared to end his life, outside the prison walls, his children, now adults, weren't pleading for mercy. They supported the execution. In the words of those who knew them, "My mother never got to see us grow up. She missed our first prom. She missed childbirth. She missed everything because our father took her life." They weren't crying. They weren't conflicted. They wanted this. At 6 p.m., Fratta was moved from Palunsky to the Huntsville unit, the site of Texas's execution chamber. Dressed in white prison garb, shackled at the wrists and ankles, he made the final walk, a straight line between past sins and the state's ultimate punishment. That same evening, his attorneys filed 11th-hour appeals challenging the use of expired pentobarbital, the drug used in Texas executions. They claimed it could cause excruciating pain. A Travis County judge temporarily paused the execution. For a brief moment, it looked like Fratta might get more time. But hours later, both the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals and the U.S. Supreme Court rejected the appeals. Clemency was denied. The execution would proceed. At 6:39 p.m. on January 10, 2023, Fratta lay strapped to the gurney. 4 lines fed into both arms. Behind the glass, witnesses watched in tense silence. Among them, Farah's brother, Zain Baquer, and Fratta's own son, Bradley Baquer, stone-faced, arms crossed, waiting. The warden stepped forward and asked the question every condemned man hears. "Do you have any last words?" Fratta turned his head slightly. He stared straight ahead at the ceiling. He didn't look at his son. He didn't look at Farah's brother. He didn't acknowledge anyone. And then he said nothing. Complete silence. No apology, no explanation, no plea for forgiveness. Just like the night Farah was murdered, he had nothing to say. A spiritual advisor stood beside him, holding his hand, whispering prayers. The execution began. The lethal dose of pentobarbital entered his veins. Fratta exhaled deeply. His chest rose and fell. Then he snored, several times, his body reacting to the drug, shutting down his brain, his lungs, his heart. And then, stillness. His chest stopped moving. His eyes stayed open, staring at nothing. At 7:49 p.m., he was pronounced dead. 24 minutes. That's how long it took for the state of Texas to end the life of a man who spent decades on death row. The man who once paid $3,000 and a Jeep to have his wife silenced had met his own state-sanctioned end, quietly, legally, and alone. For the family of Farah Fratta, it was not a celebration. Victims' rights advocate Andy Kahn, who had stayed close to the family for decades, said it simply. Bob Fratta was a coward in 1994, and 28 years later, he was still a coward. He never took responsibility. He never apologized. He never looked his son in the eye. He ordered his wife's death. Now his children watch the state take his. And here's what will haunt you. Farah's father, Lex Baker, had died years earlier, never seeing justice for his daughter. Before he passed, Andy Khan made him a promise. I will be there. I will witness it for you. And he kept that promise. Standing in that room as Robert Fratta took his last breath. But does that bring Farah back? Does it erase the fact that 3 children lost both their parents? Does it fix anything? Or does it just add one more body to the pile? Robert Allen Fratta is dead. But the story doesn't end with him. Joseph Price Dash, the middleman who drove the triggerman to the crime scene and supplied the murder weapon, never made it to the execution chamber. On June 19, 2025, at age 70, he died of natural causes in his cell at the Polunsky unit. More than 2 years after Fratta's death, his passing closed the final chapter on a man who'd once turned murder into a transaction. He died in prison, but he died on his own terms, not strapped to a gurney, not with witnesses watching, just quietly, in his sleep. Howard Paul Guidry, the 17-year-old triggerman who pulled the trigger in Farah's garage, remains on death row. He's been there for over 3 decades now, waiting, appealing, still alive. The kid who was paid $3,000 and a Jeep to kill a mother of 3 is now a middle-aged man behind bars, wondering if his day will ever come. Or if he'll die like Price Dash did, of old age, before the state ever gets its turn. So here's where we are. 3 men were convicted. 1 was executed. 1 died naturally. 1 is still waiting. And Farah Fratta is still dead. Her children grew up without a mother. They buried her when they were just kids. And then, decades later, they stood behind glass and watched the state kill their father. Now you have to ask yourself the question that's been sitting in your chest this entire time. Did Texas finally deliver justice for Farah? Was this closure? Was this right? Or did the state become exactly what Robert was? A killer deciding who deserves to live and who deserves to die. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Robert Fratta paid someone to kill his wife. The state of Texas paid its employees to kill Robert. Both believed they had the right. Both believed they were justified. Both ended a life on purpose. So what's the difference? The law? A piece of paper that says one is murder and the other is justice. Is that enough for you? Some of you are going to say yes. Absolutely. He got exactly what he deserved. He took a life, the state took his. Eye for an eye. Justice served. Farah's family can finally move on. And maybe you're right. Maybe that's what justice looks like. A man who shows no remorse, who orders a hit like he's buying a car, who smiles on camera the day after his wife's murder. Maybe he forfeited his right to live. But others are going to say no. This isn't justice. This is revenge. The state dragged this out for 3 decades, convicted him, overturned the conviction, convicted him again, and then killed him anyway. And for what? Farah's still dead. Her kids still lost both parents. The system that admitted it made mistakes, then turned around and executed a man based on the same evidence. How is that justice? How is that not just state-sponsored murder? And here's the part that's going to make some of you angry. If we don't trust the government with our healthcare, our taxes, our privacy, why do we trust them to decide who lives and dies? If the courts can overturn convictions, if they can admit errors, if they can say we got it wrong, then how can they also say, but we're definitely right this time, so let's kill him? Robert Fratta never apologized. He never showed remorse. He never acknowledged what he did. And maybe that's why so many people felt nothing when he died. But does a lack of remorse justify execution? Or does it just make us feel better about watching it happen? This is the question you have to answer. Not me, you. Because this isn't just about Robert Fratta. It's about every person on death row. Every family waiting for closure. Every appeal, every technicality, every execution that happens while half the country cheers and the other half protests. So I want to hear from you, right now, in the comments. Type justice if you think Robert Fratta got exactly what he deserved, if you believe the state was right to execute him, if you think this is what closure looks like, or type unfair if you think the system went too far. If you think executing a man after overturning his conviction once is wrong. If you think the state became the very thing it was punishing. And don't just drop a word. Explain your side. Tell me why you believe what you believe. Because this story doesn't have a clean ending. It doesn't have a hero. It doesn't have a lesson that makes you feel good. It just has bodies, Farahs, Roberts, and a system that keeps deciding who's next. So what do you think? Was this justice or just another execution in a broken system?